talking right away ahead of time because before it says go live, I sit here with this blank look on my face, waiting for the button to come up and say, you're live now. And every time I look back at the video, I'm sitting like this, watching for the go live button to go so I can brighten up and go, hey, we're here. So I started talking before we got rolling. So, folks, welcome. Good evening. It is Thursday evening, and I'm so glad you're here. Ron Frisbee, I see you're there. Lewis, I see you're there as well. And I know there's some big thing going on. I usually do the Consequential Rapscallions with Jeffrey Dougherty on Thursday nights, but I got preempted for something else tonight after the show last night here, so I didn't announce it last night. So this might be a surprise to some people that are going to be here tonight. But we did announce it early in the day. So we're going to just roll with it and do what we do. I'm going to check my sound to make sure I'm going through the right sound channel. And let's see, speakers, audio. There we go. Okay, I'm good. And just a little technical thing going on there. And so if you are watching this in archive and didn't catch it live, just remember, and everybody here too who catches it live, you can always watch these in archive as well. So it's fun live because you can say we're doing live broadcasting and you're catching things as they happen. That's always fun. Kay, good to see you. KT Emma, glad to see you here. And good to have you. And so this book, as many of you know already who have been here, is a book I wrote quite a while ago. And we're about halfway into the book now. And it's a shorter book. It's a book that I wrote for kids, but it's actually a book that was mostly purchased by college age and up was the demographic we ended up hitting. So it's really like a young adult novel, but it appealed to kids, and I've read it to kids, even though some of it's a bit challenging for kids, as my agent of the time said. He said, don't worry, make it challenging for kids. And hi, Emma. There we go, K Emma, KT Emma. And so and Lewis, hey, how you doing? I don't know if you were here when I said hello, but you're here now. So while it's not strictly a children's book, it's not strictly an adult book either, but it does deal with adult themes deep down that are covered up. I would classify this as, the kind of thing you see Disney or Pixar, some of these putting out that are animated cartoons that are for kids, but there's so much parental adult info in them that it draws the parent in. And that's kind of the way you have to do with kids. You got a lot of kids, Kay? I know I've seen some of your stuff on Instagram. How many kids do you have exactly? You have 2 or 3? I have 6 altogether. I've got 3 older ones, as some of you know this about me already. I got 3 older ones, my twin daughters who are 27, and my son who's 18. And then I was married again back about 14 years ago, 13. We started off almost 15 years ago, married about 11 or 12 years ago now. I got 07 to 09. So it'll be 12 years. And we've got 3 little ones, 10, 7, and 4, boy and 2 girls. So, Kay, you have 4, and 2 of them are stepkids, or 4 kids of your own and 2 stepkids. Not that you've got to reveal all that personal information, but just curious. So do you have 6 in all or 4 in all? 2 of your 4 are stepkids, I'm assuming is what that means. So, hey, Becky, good to see you here. Susie Q, thank you for calling me Captain again. At ease, I would say. And all right, so good to have you here. Good to see everybody coming in. And we left off with Tam O'Hare. I feel like I need to do introductory stuff every night. I don't like to just jump into reading because there's stuff to say. So you have four of your own, two older living with their dad. That's a long story. I get you on that. I know what you mean. I will tell you this, Kay, and those listening. Um, I was given sole custody of my three children back in what would be the year 2001. And my kids came to live with me when I was divorced. That's like 18 years ago now. And so my daughters were, you can do the math, 18, they're 27 now. They were 9 at the time. And okay, you may have more. Okay, my dynasty building days have ended. My last child with my wife, Rainey, our little 4-year-old, Ellery, she was the surprise child. I had been going to Egypt for years, and Rainey had never come. And after Flynn and Rowan, Claire, my 10-year-old now and 7-year-old, we were just getting to the point where we thought, well, Rainey can come traveling with me now. And she's going to come to Egypt with me next time. And we started planning that. And I remember there is a story here. I don't want to be too off colored for your delicate ears, folks, but some of you may have heard this story before. I think I told this somewhere. But I came back from Egypt once. I had been gone for a month. Came home from Egypt. This is back in 2013, perhaps. Yes, because Ellery was born in December of 2014, because she'll be 5 this December. So 2013, and I got back in March, and I'd been gone a month. And the next morning after I'm home, I'm down in my office and studio, and I'm trying to get myself reacclimated from desert climbs to now March in Wisconsin, end of winter, and catch up on my email and stuff. It's mid-morning. My wife, Rainey, comes running down the stairs into my studio, buck tea naked. And she runs over to my desk and she goes, "Buddy," she said, "kids are watching cartoons. You got 8 minutes." And I said, "Woo!" I said, "I can do it twice." And so anyway, there we go. That happened. And about 2 weeks later, my wife comes down the stairs to the studio. She's dressed this time, and she has a little thing in her hand, and she sticks this in front of my face, and she goes, "What does that look like to you?" And it was a pregnancy test. And I said, "Uh-oh." And she said, "I thought you were going to take care of this with your doc." I said, "Well, I talked to him. We just hadn't planned it or scheduled it." And we literally spent 2 days just like, oh my God, oh shit. And it wasn't about a beautiful new child. It was about having another child. There's a totally different thing there, two different dynamics going on. And so, and it was a rough pregnancy for Rainey. She may not have survived this under different circumstances. So, there you go. That's my youngest. So we've got 3 kids at home. I've got my 3 oldest are out. My daughter's doing their mermaid thing down in North Carolina. And my son went down to live with them last year. And he's now working down there, and he's got his own place. And so there you go. Blah, blah, blah. I don't even know how I rabbit trailed onto that, because rabbit trail is so fun. Kay, yeah, you are absolutely correct. It's such a blessing. Life is short. Make kids. I got no problems being a dad. Like I say, when I met Rainey in 2005, I had already had my kids, sole custody of them for 4 years. I was the single dad with my kids. My ex-wife would come and get them every now and then. Most unreliable person in the world. And somebody who was a thorn in the side to our family for most of the years. Now that my son turned 18 this January, that's all over. Thank God. And I no longer have to deal with her. But I pretty much was the guy in charge of all of that. And my ex-wife was not. So there you go. That's done. All right, let me get to where we were. We had just finished in the story, chapter 9, which was the hunt for the Elizabeth Jonas. Hey, Audrey, how are you doing? We're just going to get started with the reading. So I want to make sure I didn't miss anybody, by the way. Kitten, good to see you. Susie Q, K, Emma, already said hello to you, but a hello again. Lewis, good to see you. That's Patriots Corner, folks. Becky, good to see you. And let's see, anybody else sneak in here that I'm missing? Nope, not yet. Ron Frisbee, I see you're way up at the top. I don't know if you're in here or not. And as I've mentioned, Jeff and I do the Consequential Rapscallions. I got preempted tonight for somebody else. So he's doing a show. I think he put his show on still right now as we're going. So that might be where a lot of people are right now. And because we all kind of share this same few number of hours, finite number of hours to do our shows every day. All right, so we did the hunt for the Elizabeth Jonas, and if you remember how that chapter ended last night with Tam and 100 screeching raccoons swinging in behind him from the Moreau to the Elizabeth Jonas. And that's an illustration from the book, obviously. So now we're going to move into chapter 10. And chapter 10 is For God, Queen, and Country. So everybody ready? Here we go. A thunderous clash of sword and beast mixed with frenzied shouts and cries. Anyone standing on the Scottish shore at that moment could have heard the din of the battle as it carried over the waves. The raccoons of the Moreau fought valiantly against the ferrets and weasels of the English navy. Although the Elizabeth Jonas had nearly 300 sailors, the crew of the Moreau handily took a quick advantage due to their ferocity and sheer determination. For Tam, this battle was very personal. As he fought with the sailors of the Elizabeth Jonas, his mind was flooded with faces, MacNutt and his father, William, Little Brindle and Argyle Whitebeard, Mary Queen of Scots, Abigail, and that rogue Bothwell. To all these Tam had given his word of honor, and it seemed as though the intertwining of their fates, as well as his own, all rested very heavily on what would happen over the next few minutes. Tam looked around and saw that his raccoons were gaining ground on the English, pushing them closer and closer to the far side of the main deck. Tam smiled confidently. The English captain, Martin Frobisher, was looking down on the fray from his position on the poop deck. Yes, folks, every time I read that book to kids, they laugh when I say poop deck. If you don't know what the poop deck is, it's the deck that is the most aft, the most rear of the ship. Maybe that's why they used poop to describe it. But it's way up there on the top. And that's usually where the captain will be, where the wheel of the ship will be, and so on. And so that's his position. He's up on the poop. And Tam, knowing that he must personally engage and defeat the English captain in order to win the ship, yelled out to his crew, "The ship is ours, lads, fight on!" At that, he leapt up to the rail, grabbed a rope, and swung over the top of the battle, landing on the opposite stairway that led to the upper deck. Frobisher saw him coming and drew his sword, meeting Tam at the top of the steps. "How dare you lead an assault on the Queen's Navy?" yelled Captain Frobisher as he thrust his sword at Tam. And I've got to show you this illustration now. This is one I added for the color version of the book. There is Tam here and Martin Frobisher having come down from the poop. And they're out on the Scottish Sea, the North Sea, not too far from land. And you see a bit of the English flag hanging down. And this is the Elizabeth Jonas, which is actually really was an actual warship that was launched by Henry VIII and which sank not too long afterwards. So here we are on the Elizabeth Jonas and the sword fight between Tam and the English captain. So you may represent the Queen Elizabeth's navy, Tam thundered back as he parried away the captain's thrust. But I'm here in the name of Mary Queen of Scots. He then advanced on the ferret with a few cuts of his own. Captain Frobisher was pushed back a few steps, relinquishing excellent footing to Tam on the poop deck. From one pirate captain to another, taunted Tam as he brought his blade straight up in front of his face in mock salute. This served only to anger Frobisher, who had worked very hard to make the transformation from common pirate to Queen's Navy. Tam knew this, and he sought to throw the captain off his game. For the first rule of hand-to-hand combat was, strike with your wits and never your rage. Remember that from Seamus Duggery on the Moreau earlier in the book. It was apparent to Tam almost immediately, however, that Captain Frobisher was no Seamus Duggery, for he fought with the skill of a naval officer who'd been seasoned for battle. The captain, chin high and nose in the air, held his blade out, pointing its deadly tip directly at Tam. In his other hand was his hat, which he used to parry Tam's blade. When he moved, his feet glided with the grace of a dancer. And you know what a parry is? If somebody thrust at my chest, I might take my sword and I would parry it away, or parry it away, or parry it away. It's a parry. And sometimes when they were fighting, they would use rapier dagger, and they would use the dagger in the left hand to parry as they and thrust with the sword. And sometimes they would use whatever they had in their hands. They would take a hat, take his hat off, and he'd parry a sword away as he's fighting. So that's what the captain's doing. Let's see. Tam, who was equally well trained in the sword, parried away his opponent's blade, who then advanced quickly, coming in for a low, extended boar's thrust to Tam's midsection. That's almost like where you're stepping out and you're going down very low and coming up with the sword towards somebody's midsection from down low. That's a boar's thrust. Tam leapt upward and backward, avoiding the captain's blade, while dropping his own blade in a low horizontal parry, pinning Frobisher's blade to the deck at his feet. Now, by the way, we had done this little scene at the Renaissance Festival. It was a couple of years after I had officially resigned and been done with it. And I was asked to come back and do this on the children's stage. And I had two of my very good friends who were part of the rapier dagger, the fight community there, very seasoned fighters on the stage. And I gave them masks. We made them masks. But I happen to have Martin Frobisher hanging right here. Hang on. Let me grab it. Tam O'Hare is stowed away in another box. He's being stored right now. But so Captain Frobisher was a ferret, and I had friends of mine that were fighting with these masks on. They had their costumes from the festival and their swords and so on, like these. But they had these masks. And this is the one that we made for Martin Frobisher. And he's the ferret. And my buddy Dave actually made these out of leather for me. And he surprised me. I didn't even know he was going to do that. And then I took and painted the faces on. And so this was Martin Frobisher. And if I can get the tied string out of the way. So it went on here, and he was able to speak his lines while he was on stage. And this was the ferret. And then we had the rabbit, Tam, which is, I don't know where he is at the moment other than stored and stowed. So that was Martin Frobisher. And so we did that on stage, and I read this scene to the audience as they performed the sword fight on stage. And so it was really fun for the kids to watch. So now, then Tam threw a cutting slice of his own at Frobisher's head. Whoosh, like that. The English captain had no option but to duck and pull back or lose his head. The pair circled each other, their blades ringing out with each thrust and parry. Captain Frobisher, taking advantage of a momentary opening, cut his sword across his opponent's chest, slicing open a long slash in Tam's leather doublet. Unharmed, Tam thrust at the captain, nicking him in the arm. The captain, unfazed, save for a slight wince, parried Tam's blade away, then caught Tam in the ribs with his boot, sending him flying hard against the wheel of the ship. Tam grimaced from the pain, and Frobisher was on top of him before he had time to regain his balance. Their blades were locked and their faces inches apart. The two looked into each other's eyes, and Tam saw in Martin Frobisher a worthy opponent, and perhaps in a different reality, an able ally. He then pushed the captain away and thrust his sword immediately, which Frobisher parried away to the left, again with his hat. The English captain instantly followed up his parry with an intended thrust, but as he took his forward step, the heel of his boot slipped on a rope lying on the deck. Frobisher lost his footing and stumbled. Tam, taking advantage of that brief second of imbalance, caught the hilt piece of the captain's sword with the tip of his blade, and in one mighty arc yanked it out of Frobisher's hand, sending it flying through the air, over the rail, and down onto the main deck. Tam immediately thrust the point of his sword up against the captain's chest and smiled with a deliberate, icy stare. He did not wish to take his life, but he would if he must. "You will have other battles to fight, Frobisher," Tam admonished the captain, "if you order your crew to drop their weapons." Without moving his head, the captain glanced tentatively at the fight below. "Do it," Tam hissed, pressing the point of his blade just a little bit harder. Frobisher winced, then opened his eyes and stared hard at Tam. "Lay down your arms," barked the English captain. "Cease hostilities." Almost immediately, the battle froze in place, and all grew quiet. The crew of the Elizabeth Jonas, much to Tam's amazement, lowered their swords to the deck and stepped back as the raccoons of the Moreau, in true pirate fashion, began gathering them up. "The Elizabeth Jonas," said Frobisher to Tam, "is yours." You are an honorable creature," said Tam to Frobisher, "and I shall treat you with the respect and honor that your royal appointment deserves." Captain Frobisher then motioned for his sword to be brought to him. When he received it, he laid it across both his outstretched palms and offered it to Tam in official surrender. Tam took it and gave a quick, courteous bow of his head. The captain gave a courteous nod back, then stood to attention, puffed out his chest, put his nose in the air, and slid his hand into the gap between the buttons of his doublet. "The Elizabeth Jonas is now the property of the Scottish Navy and Mary Queen of Scots," shouted Tam, raising the captain's sword high above his head. The raccoons let out a deafening cheer, brandishing their swords, as well as those captured from the English opponents, high above their heads. Tam looked to the sky and silently thanked God that the Elizabeth Jonas was taken without so much as one cannonball being fired. By the way, here's Tam in this scene that's coming up now, where he's leaning up against the gunwales of the Elizabeth Jonas, you see there. And they've just won the ship. And there's Tam O'Hare, who is now the captain of the Moreau, and technically also the captain of the Elizabeth Jonas, the great and mighty English warship, which he just won with about 100 raccoon pirates. So that's Captain Tam. He's cocky and dashing. So Tam ordered his non-essential crew members of the English crew, locked in the holds below deck, along with food and a barrel of fresh water. The others were put to the task of sailing the English warship under supervision of the raccoon pirates, turned Scottish privateers. He placed Captain Frobisher under guard in his own cabin and issued orders sending half the raccoons back to the Moreau. What next? Asked McCrick. Tam looked out toward the sea, thinking. Turning suddenly to McCrick, he said, Set a southerly course for the harbor at Harwich. What? Barked McCrick in shock, choking on the singular word. No disrespect, sir, but you want us to sail this prize ship right down into the English waters, all the way to the blimmin' Queen of England's front porch? Aye, Tam replied, and I want the Moreau to wait here for our return. Begging the captain's pardon, sir, came back McCrick, but why do you want us to bring us right down into the enemy's busiest seaport? Why did we just risk life and limb capturing this vessel to give her right back and get slapped in irons for piracy? Trust me, smiled Tam. I have a plan. Then he dismissed a bewildered McCrick to carry out his orders. And I hope to heaven I'm not making a colossal mistake, Tam said to himself as he stood alone looking out to the open sea. That's the end of chapter 11. I see Rocky Stucci must be in the room. Rocky, how you doing, everybody? Rocky's in the room, so shut up. There we go. Leslie, good to see you as well. Catching up on who's here and who is not. Audrey, of course, you're here. Ron Frisbee said hi to you. And let's see. Kitten, Leslie, Ron, Jennifer Roberts. Good to see you, Jennifer. You're probably not here. You have to go sleep. You can catch this tomorrow. So let's see. Seeing if there's anybody I've missed. Just saying hello, thanking you for being here. Good to have you here. Jennifer Roberts and I probably are related somewhere way back. I'll bet you, because the Roberts generally only came from a couple of places, Wales and Ireland. So it's very easy to get us all put together. Need to go to bed to toddlers at 6:30 a.m. Listening always, Scotty. Good night. Good to see you, Kay. You have a good night. All right, folks, here we go. We're going to go on to chapter 11, The Plan. The homecoming of a great English warship like the Elizabeth Jonas was always a grand affair. The gallant four-master had been built many years earlier by King Henry VIII of England and was now the flagship of Queen Elizabeth's fleet. As soon as the tall ship was seen approaching the port of Harwich, runners were sent to Greenwich Palace in London, the royal residence of Queen Elizabeth of England. The young queen, Henry VIII's second daughter to assume the throne after the successively short reigns of her brother Edward VI and sister Mary Tudor, who, by the way, folks, was also known as Bloody Mary, was eager to hear of her grand warship's exploits and decided to make a personal appearance in Harwich to honor the captain of the Elizabeth Jonas. She called for Sir William Cecil, her trusted counselor, and commanded him to prepare the royal court for travel. It was Sir Cecil who had promoted the once pirate Martin Frobisher to the status of royal privateer, and he had a personal interest in Frobisher's successes. Elizabeth, though officially eager to speak with Captain Frobisher, saw this as a great opportunity to take her court on one of her aptly called progressions through the English countryside. It was on these little excursions that Elizabeth was able to tear herself away from the heavy affairs of state and spend time milling through the shops of jewelers, crafters, and dressmakers. It was, in a very real sense, a vacation shopping spree, only on a much more royal scale. Elizabeth used her progressions to find furniture, clothing, and various objects and baubles suitable for her monarchical status, as well as to solidify her presence with her subjects, who lived in the cities, towns, and hamlets far from London. She absolutely loved these trips away from court, and her heart jumped in her breast as she prepared herself for the journey. The road from London to Harwick was well traveled, and the 70 some miles was all the more glorious on horseback. Queen Elizabeth, or good Queen Bess. Sorry, I just had some kind of a weird alert jump up on my computer screen that distracted me, and there it goes again. All right. The road from London to Harwick was well traveled, and the 70 some miles was all the more glorious on horseback. Queen Elizabeth, or good Queen Bess, as the folk in the countryside eventually came to know her, loved to travel by horse. The prospect of several days on horseback through the countryside was frightening for the Queen's personal guard, but wholly exciting to the exuberant young monarch. "Those stuffy carriages make me nearly vomitous," she had confided in good humor to her ladies in waiting. "I would as soon spend 4 days in one of those foul contraptions as I would have my hair pulled out strand by strand." The ladies laughed with the young queen as they accompanied her to her private rooms, all of them giddy with excitement. They would leave for Harwick on the morrow, and there was much to prepare before the rising of the next sun. The royal herald had ridden on ahead to deliver word of the queen's visit and arrange for her lodgings. All Harwick was buzzing with excitement. First the Elizabeth Jonas, and now the good queen herself. A wealthy merchant ship owner by the name of Thomas More, a stout, middle-aged bear dressed all in black, with a gold chain hanging about his shoulders, was one of the Harwick's most esteemed citizens. He received a visit from the royal herald and was to be host to the traveling queen and court in his home on the corner of High Street and St. Austin's Lane in Harwick. The honor was unmatched, and Moore set out about immediately preparing his home to receive the queen. After meeting with the household of Thomas More, the herald went directly to the wharf to see if Captain Frobisher of the Elizabeth Jonas was there to greet him. No one's allowed on board the Elizabeth Jonas, your heraldship," said the nervous raccoon guarding the ship's gangplank. "Perhaps you didn't comprehend my words, sailor," the herald said with nose in the air disdain. "I'll speak a bit more slowly for you. I'm Queen Elizabeth's personal herald, and she is approaching Harwick with all haste to honor Captain Frobisher and the crew of this great warship. I must speak with the captain at once." He punctuated the words "at once" through grit teeth. "At once." "Well," improvised the not-so-fast-witted pirate, cum English sailor, "the captain's all tied up at the moment." "I suggest you inform your captain of the Queen's visit," retorted the now exasperated herald, "and impress upon him the urgency of making ready for her presence in the morning." Message delivered, the herald spun his horse around and headed back to Moore's house in Harwick, where he intended, after 4 days of traveling the dusty roads between London and Harwick, to eat a sumptuous meal, soak in a hot tub, smoke his pipe, and retire to a comfy chair before the hearth to drink his fill of wine. The tongue-tied raccoon sighed and nearly fainted from the strain of his encounter with the royal herald, then turned and ran up the gangplank, yelling for Captain Tam. See you later, Audrey, by the way. And thanks for the links there. I appreciate it. "What is it?" asked Tam, coming to the poop deck gunnels, facing midships. "The Queen, Captain," said the raccoon. "She's coming here in the morning, sir." "Brilliant," boomed Tam with a broad, satisfied smile. "Return to your post." McCrick, who was with Tam on the poop deck, puffed out his cheeks and whistled. "The bloomin' Queen, eh? With all due respect, do you really know what you're doing, Captain? It was a risk I needed to take, started Tam, but I was sure Her Majesty would do just as she has done. Tam paced the poop deck, looking away from Harwick and out to sea. McCrick followed at his heels. After years of warring with Scotland, Tam explained, the Elizabeth Jonas was sent to molest the Scottish naval fleet and merchant vessels. Now she's coming back to port, as glorious as the day she left. Only now she's become legendary in the conflict with our neighbors to the north. Not only does this ship return in glory, she returns with a string of successful engagements over which to boast. Of course, the Queen would come to honor her. I'm not following you, sir, said McCrick slowly, shaking his head in bewilderment. I understand fully why the Queen would want to greet her own ship. What I dinna understand is, why would you want the Queen of England to greet you? Especially since as soon as she lays eyes on you, she knows you've imprisoned her captain and stolen her ship. Tam didn't answer right away. He looked out as far as he could see to the mountainous white clouds, piled up like snow where the sky touched the sea. A balmy breeze wafted in, and he lifted his head, closed his eyes, and breathed deep the fresh ocean air. When he opened his eyes again, a gull floated by on the warm updraft, seemingly carefree and calm as the draft of air lifted it higher and higher above the waves. When the wind died, the gull fell toward the water. It flapped its wings in a sudden flurry, let out a shrill squawk, and flew off toward the shore. Tam looked to the deck in thought, then put an arm around McCrick's shoulders. I want Queen Elizabeth on board this ship, said Tam matter-of-factly. I want her to greet me face to face. Begging your pardon, sir, but why? Asked McCrick, quite perplexed. Because I need to ask of her a favor, replied Tam. Oh, now you've really lost me, choked McCrick. Tam turned to face his first mate, placing both hands on the burly raccoon's shoulders, and said, I'm counting on the fact that she knows who I am, and that she knows I am a creature of honor. I'm relying on that bit of nobility in her heart that transcends her place in the great order of things. I'm relying on her grace and her love. Love, sir? Queried McCrick. Aye, love, punctuated Tam. Elizabeth's cousin Mary rules as queen in Scotland, Tam explained to McCrick. For years, Mary's mother waged war and havoc in her attempt to keep English rule out of Scotland. Neither Elizabeth nor Mary wanted this continued unrest. They both want resolution and peace. Mary wants only to be recognized as queen of her own country. Elizabeth wants recognition with her authority over Mary. All right, said McCrick, not yet fully understanding. I'm beginning to see your point. Go on. You see, McCrick, I have something, Tam said as he outstretched his arms and turned in a slow, big circle, gesturing to the ship around him. Something that belongs to Elizabeth. Perhaps she will see the honor in my returning it and grant me a request. Which is, said McCrick, voice trailing off, awaiting Tam's punchline. A letter of truce to her cousin Mary, said Tam, all business. McCrick stood silent, his mouth wide open. Tam looked up into the sky again. Do you see the gulls above our heads? He asked McCrick, motioning with his eyes to the tops of the masts. Aye, replied McCrick, looking up. Mary is that gull floating on the breeze. She's delicate, she's fragile. Without the warm air of England supporting her, she will fight to stay aloft. She is surrounded by enemies who wish to see her downfall. Only Elizabeth can keep that from happening. If Elizabeth opposes her, she's finished. no matter how many Tam O'Hares and Laird Bothwells stand to defend her. Tam, with McCrick alongside, paced to the far aft railing of the ship. I will appeal to Elizabeth's sense of what is noble and what's right. I'll appeal to her love as Mary's cousin. Tam smiled broadly and slapped McCrick's back. The big Mercoon just looked down at the deck with a bewildered frown and shook his head. End, by the way, of chapter 11. And we're at 9:41, and we're going to approach chapter 12. I'm going to tell you something. This is almost one of my favorite chapters in the book. And so I'm going to go ahead and read this, and this will be where we end tonight after chapter 12. I think you're going to like this. This is Harwick. It's about 16 pages in this book. So I hope you'll enjoy this now. This is chapter 12, Harwick. It's a harbor town. As a matter of fact, Thomas More, not Thomas Moore, who was under Henry VIII, of course. This is Thomas More, More. He was a merchant in Harwick, and he has a big house, and his house is still there in Harwick Harbor in England. You can see it. Now, and as I said, it's right at the corner of, I can't remember the name of the streets off the top of my head. It's at the corner of St. Albans and one other street. You can go visit his big house. So the next morning dawned to the sound of lapping waves and the call of gulls. The next new day, never to be dissuaded, was imposing itself on both Tam and Queen Elizabeth. And despite their very different stations in life, their mornings took on a curiously similar tone. Yellow light streaked across the water and into the portals of the Elizabeth Jonas, and onto Tam's face, waking him. He called for his morning tea, while golden tendrils of light crept up the streets of Harwick, making their way to the window of the Queen's bedchamber in the house of Thomas More. The warm brightness lit on Elizabeth's face, waking her. She sat up, stretched, and called for her morning tea. Tam opened Captain Frobisher's closet on board the ship and respectfully borrowed clothing more appropriate for an English sea captain. He left his sword-sliced doublet hanging over the back of Frobisher's chair. As he did so, Elizabeth, in the house of Thomas More, called for her personal attendants to dress her. As the dawn turned to early morn, Tam went for a stroll around the decks of the Elizabeth Jonas, hands clasped behind his back as he breathed in the fresh sea air. At the same moment, Elizabeth strolled along the terrace that surrounded the rooftop of her Harwick lodgings. Since her days of imprisonment in the Tower of London, when her now 6 years dead half-sister, Mary, thought she was trying to steal her throne, Elizabeth had been in the habit of taking a walk at the crack of dawn. This house and this little town, however, were a far cry from the tower and its walkway on the eastern wall, for it gave her a beautiful view of the sea. And there in the harbor she could see the tops of the masts of the Elizabeth Jonas. Magnificent ship. Elizabeth closed her eyes and breathed deeply of the clean sea air, washing old bitter memories from her mind. Today she would live as though these old days had served no other purpose than to create a stark contrast to the happiness and fulfillment she now felt as queen. Today holds the future, Tam decided. Today is our future, determined Elizabeth. Tam and Elizabeth both felt an inner hum of anticipation that made them feel as if today held something important, perhaps important beyond words. It was just a feeling, but it seemed as though they each held a secret gift in the palm of their hands, and they were eager to see what it was and with whom they could share it. It was a day for making quiet history. Though totally separate and with wholly personal agendas, they both breathed a heavy sigh in their private chambers expectant of the day's events. Little did they know how soon their worlds would intertwine, creating entirely new paths for them both. Around mid morning, with much fanfare and a trumpeting parade, the Queen's entourage, along with Thomas Moore and his entire household, stopped just before the gangplank of the Elizabeth Jonas. "Announce the Queen to Captain Frobisher," commanded the Queen's herald, who'd been there once before. The raccoon guard turned on his heel, raced up the gangplank, and disappeared. After a few silent moments, the anxious Queen spoke. "Oh, let us just proceed. I didn't travel all this way to grow pink in the sun by the seashore," and she nodded to the gangplank. "This will be my first time aboard one of my warships, and I'll not be delayed another solitary moment." "Yes, Your Majesty," everyone droned out in overtly dramatic unison, all bowing deeply. The Queen rolled her eyes. With one courtier walking backward before the Queen, holding her hand and another behind her, Elizabeth started her slow ascent up the narrow gangplank. "How do you know where you're going if you're walking backward?" she inquired of the ferret courtier leading the way. "Why, experience, of course, Your Majesty," repeated the ferret confidently as he stepped off the side of the gangplank and fell to the waters below. Kersploosh. He sputtered and puffed while thrashing in the cold water. Elizabeth rolled her eyes for the second time in as many minutes. "Somebody do fish him out," she said, bemused. "Let's have done." Then she hiked the skirt of her dress above her ankles and practically ran to the top of the gangplank and onto the deck of the Elizabeth Jonas. Before the rest of her entourage could follow, several of Tam's raccoons closed in ranks behind the Queen, blocking off the gangplank, pulling it on board. The Queen, suddenly frightened, looked around for her guards, but in her haste to get on board, she had gone up the gangplank before them, highly irregular, highly dangerous. She could hear the shouts of her royal guardsmen down on the decks below, the docks below. Elizabeth froze. Due to her impatience, she had ignored protocol and placed herself in a predicament she had never encountered before. She really had no idea what to expect next, but she would face it like the Queen she was. If there was one thing her father Henry had taught her, it was nobility in the air of opposition. Pulling on all the royal airs she could, Elizabeth turned, threw her chin up, and faced her captors. "What is the meaning of this?" demanded the Queen, sounding regal and authoritative, while at the same time attempting to hide her fear. "Please, pardon me, and let me not feel your anger, Your Majesty," said Tam, descending the stairs from the upper deck. "But I humbly request that you grant me this irregular audience. I am Lord Tamerlane O'Hare of Harehenge Castle, County Meath, Ireland." Tam fell to his knee and lowered his head before Queen Elizabeth. Stunned, the Queen looked around the deck at the small army of raccoon sailors, then back down at the kneeling hare before her. "The great Tam O'Hare, is it?" she said, pausing with respect and anger. "I hear you have offered your allegiance to my cousin Mary, she who would have my throne in my place," she said, suddenly looking away. "Aye, that's true," said Tam. "I did lend her fealty many years ago, while still a youth. But I come here seeking your heart on a matter, not for politics' sake, although politics have certainly muddled my matters of heart of late." Interested by his odd request, Elizabeth touched Tam on his head and said, "Rise, we will hear you on this matter of heart." She then strolled to the side of the ship and motioned her guards into silence down on the wharf. "Where is Captain Frobisher?" Elizabeth asked. "He's safe in his cabin, Your Majesty," continued Tam, "and will be returned healthy and unharmed." The Queen stood silent for a moment. Go on, Lord O'Hare, your matter of heart. Tam told Queen Elizabeth all that had transpired up to that very moment, omitting nothing. She listened in long silence with growing intrigue. He told her of his plans to visit the New World, of the messenger from Argyle, Whitebeard McDervish, and of his episode with Seamus Duggery and subsequent acquisition of the Moreau. He also recounted his family ties to Mary Queen of Scotland. The Queen folded her hands and paced as she listened intently. He told her of how little Brindolin had been stolen by the good people, of Mary's request and Bothwell's plottings, and finally of his capture of the very ship on whose deck they now stood. And by the way, here's an illustration of that, where Tam comes down to meet the Queen. There is Queen Elizabeth in the background, and by the way, yes, an historic dress and hat of hers that I took from one of her paintings. And there's Tam with his bonnet on and his long feather and his green doublet. And you see all the salty raccoon pirates all around them, still out to sea, or still out on the water in the boat at the wharf. So there's Tam O'Hare and Queen Elizabeth on board the ship. You can see them there. All right. All right, here we go. When Tam finished his tale, the Queen spoke. And all you wish to do is find your little Brindolin, is it? She asked. Aye, your Majesty, Brindolin, replied Tam. And you're planning to steal our warship for Lord Bothwell? She asked angrily. Your Majesty, began Tam, as I explained, I'm Irish, and as such a subject of the English crown. Due to a series of events in my youth, I swore my allegiance to Mary when she was but a babe, and I can do none else but honor my word. I have returned your grand warship out of respect and honor for you and your throne. Not to mention your dislike of Earl of Bothwell, added the Queen. Tam nodded and continued, Bothwell and I are none too fond, your Majesty, but I do know that he loves Queen Mary. While I do not ascribe to his methods, I cannot fault his motives. Ah, indeed, matters of the heart, replied the Queen. I could sail this ship right out of Harwick and back to Scotland, said Tam, attempting to push his cause, along with your Majesty as a prize for Bothwell. But I won't. I bring this glorious warship and its crew unharmed back to you as a gift. And in return, he softened his tone, all I ask is 3 humble things of your Majesty. The impertinence! Interrupted the Queen. We are in no good humor over these matters. You overstep your bounds even further, Lord O'Hare. Elizabeth then turned her back to Tam, who dropped immediately to his knees and stared down into the wooden decking, awaiting the mercies of the Queen of England. As his eyes traced the patterns in the wood grain, Tam began to think he should have remained in Scottish waters and towed the damned warship back to Bothwell without haste. Why must he always involve himself? What drives him to act and to think and to speak and to fight? Why, when he could have been well on his way to Loch Tay, was he standing here on the deck of an English warship, hoping beyond hope to fulfill his vow to a baby queen made so many years ago? He wished for a moment to ponder the true nature of loyalty and honor, but that luxury was not to be his at this moment, on this ship before this queen. Collecting his wits, he spoke, attempting to hide the slight tremor his now violently beating heart had added to his voice. Your Majesty, Tam said, raising his eyes to meet hers, I humbly plead for your forgiveness and indulgence. When faced with crises and sorrow, sometimes desperate measures are called for. When love and honor are at stake, the mind is blinded to all else. but the servicing of those taskmasters. Elizabeth turned her head slightly, as if considering the sincerity of the humbled hair over her shoulder. Tam noticed the nuance. The life of this little girl, he continued, dropping now to both knees, has been placed into my care, and unwittingly along the way I have been drawn into fulfillment of loyal vows made very long ago. You know me, your majesty, I am a heir of honor. If you judge me by anything, judge me by this. The queen did not alter her stance. She stood very quietly and very stately. When she spoke again, it was with cold, utter sternness. Three things, she said emotionlessly. Your, your Majesty, replied Tam, unsure if he should even speak. You asked of us three things, she repeated. I did, Tam replied, voice softening and cracking. Three humble things, the queen said slowly as she turned slightly toward Tam, still not allowing him her full gaze. Humble. Humble indeed, your majesty, the hare said. Ask me, she said. Ask me, she said, with all authority, turning fully to face Tam. It was not a request, but a command. Tam began. First, I would humbly ask that you grant my ship, the Moreau, a royal writ of safe passage through English waters. Elizabeth stood without a single movement, gaze fixed upon Tam. Second, continued Tam, grant me and my crew a pardon for attacking and capturing the Elizabeth Jonas. The queen continued to stare at Tam intently. Still she made no movement nor expression of intent. Thirdly, she asked sternly. Thirdly, replied Tam, clearing his throat, and most important, give me a letter, beseeching your cousin Mary to implore Bothwell to release my young squire safely into my hands, and to seek a peaceful resolution to this conflict between your countries. Not much he's asking there, is it? Queen Elizabeth stared hard at Tam, then paced for a moment back and forth along the gunwales. She suddenly stood tall and straight, locking her gaze hard into Tam's eyes with the fire of a monarch. First, you attack our warship with designs on taking it to our enemy as a prize. She boiled at Tam, who was now sure in his heart of hearts that his plan was not a very wise one, and it had gone completely awry. Then you place our captain under arrest in his own quarters. You sail our ship into our harbor right under the noses of our troops. You hold us as hostage. Then you have the unmitigated brashness to ask of us a threefold reward. Tam said nothing, but bowed his head low while the queen paused for what seemed an eternity. Then suddenly, almost impulsively, Elizabeth blurted out in the midst of a peal of laughter, I like it! Ha 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 ha! Tam looked up in her eyes and saw her sincerity. He smiled and began to laugh with her. She took his hands in hers and raised him to his feet. By God, Lord O'Hare, you have ballsy courage, and you have brass. I'll grant your requests, the queen declared enthusiastically, smiling at Tam. You'll have your safe passage, she continued, as well as my royal pardon for you and your gallant crew. Tam heaved a sigh of relief, as did the rest of his raccoon crew who stood about him. McCrick threw his hat into the air and cried at the top of his lungs, God save the Queen! The rest of the crew chimed in, throwing their own hats in the sky. God save the Queen! Elizabeth then looked back into Tam's eyes, and all humor left her face. She bowed her head slightly, never taking her eyes from Tam's. I place only one condition on your request, Lord O'Hare, she said with all stern soberness, I have been to hell and back, establishing my throne, and I have sworn to heaven that there will be only one mistress in my court. If my cousin Mary will recognize my authority as sovereign over her country, then, and only then, will I recognize her crown. As your majesty wishes, said Tam, bowing low. Then he looked into her eyes and said, your love for your people and your love for your cousin holds the key to the future. Elizabeth smiled and with a twinkle in her eye replied, it's honor and loyalty such as yours, Lord O'Hare, that brings hope to our future. She then once again raised Tam up and looked to the crew gathered around her as she cried out, tonight, Lord Tamerlane O'Hare of Harehenge Castle and his loyal crew will dine with me at the house of Thomas More. Once again, McCrick led a crew in a rousing 3 cheers for the good King Bess. Huzzah! 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 And may God save the Queen of England, added an exuberant Tam O'Hare. God save the Queen of England, everyone shouted. Down on the wharf, Lady Moore and her servants were attempting to revive the fainted Thomas More. Tam and Elizabeth looked into each other's eyes and smiled. They had found what it was they were meant to do this day, and it made them laugh out loud. All right. Just a little bit of this chapter left, a few pages. I'm going to preface this with, this is one of my favorite scenes in the book. And hopefully you'll see why as we finish it up. Here we go. All right, everybody, pay attention. All right, here we go. The house of Harwick's Thomas More was filled with revelry that eve. Queen Elizabeth had never danced with a raccoon before, to be sure, as she considered them surly, shiftless, and below her station. Intensifying her feeling of distaste was the salty, unsavoring, ragtag nature of these raccoon pirates, who most probably was sure had never ever learned the finer turns of the pavane, or the galliard, or even the quick-paced, swinging circular steps of the French branle. And even more egregious was the offense they caused to her artistic sensibilities. A raccoon simply cannot overcome his heavy-footed and oafish ways on the dance floor, she had earlier pontificated to the ladies of her court. Yet by the wee hours she had slowly but surely shed her prejudices and shared the parquetted floor with most of Tam's crew, who each humbly requested, with hat in hand and head bowed low, at least one turn of heel with England's monarch, a thing not normally experienced by many pirate raccoons. Elizabeth, youthful, vigorous, and slightly in her cups, obliged the masked miscreants and found that she had never had a more exhaustingly enjoyable time moving to the flute, lyre, tambourine, and drum. About the time the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, the fiery young queen dropped into a giddy heap in a large chair and fell fast asleep. Her equally raccooned out ladies in waiting found their ways to various chairs, sofas, and pillows all around her. The Queen's royal guard stood tireless watch throughout the night. McCrick, early on in the festivities, had gazed across the crowded room and locked eyes with an enchantress, Thomas More's kitchen wench. The moment his black eyes met hers, he dropped the handful of potato pie he'd been stuffing into his gaping maw and veritably floated through the feasting, dancing, celebratory mob. Like a ship being guided by a light on the shore, he made his way to the doorway of the kitchens, never averting his gaze from hers. When he finally stood before her, he took her calloused, dirty hands in his own, seeing past the grease-caked fur on her face blind to the sizable mole that protruded from her equally sizable snout. His gaze pierced through all the defenses that would normally send most sailors back to the sea, coursing its way through the calloused exterior of this stout, rotund, hard-boiled working raccoon of lesser means, and all the way to her heart, which instantly captured his. Together they spent the remainder of the night dancing in the scullery, oblivious to the world around them. Tam O'Hare, after a courteous, courtly dance with the Queen, quietly recused himself from the merriment and found his way to the balcony on the roof, where Elizabeth had stood and looked out to the sea that very morning. He pulled his pipe from the pouch on his belt, lit it, and puffed deeply as he watched the stars slowly travel their courses across the night sky. His thoughts were firmly fixed on the unfinished tasks at hand. Ahead, and he longed to be on his way to fulfilling them. But for the moment, he listened to the festive din coming from the great hall of the house below and smiled. The sun would rise soon enough. The next morning, under Queen Elizabeth's orders, the Elizabeth Jonas brought Tam and his crew back to the Moreau. The trip was smooth sailing, with calm seas and warm breezes. Queen Elizabeth had granted Tam and his crew a full pardon for any acts that could be deemed piracy. She also issued a writ of free passage through all English waters, and most importantly, she wrote a sealed letter to her cousin Mary, placing it personally into Tam's hands for delivery to Mary of the Scots. Tam would never know the contents of that letter, but what mattered most to him was that he had succeeded in getting Elizabeth, the Queen of England, to write it at all. In that he felt wholly satisfied and completely accomplished in his loyalty to both monarchs. Before leaving the Elizabeth Jonas, Tam knelt before Captain Frobisher and extended his hands. Across them he offered up the captain's sword. Frobisher took it and raised it in salute to Tam, who turned and disappeared over the portside gunwale. Once on board the Moreau, Tam issued immediate orders to set sail for the Firth of Forth and the harbor of Cremand below Edinburgh, where he went directly to Holyrood Castle for an audience with Queen Mary. He informed her that the Elizabeth Jonas was in the hands of the English, and he could do nothing to prevent her from attacking Scottish ships. He also asked the Queen's forgiveness for coming home without the ship Bothwell had wanted so badly. The Lord High Admiral was furious, beside himself. He glared at Tam with his yellow wolf eyes, then turned and stormed out of Mary's chambers, stomping and muttering as he strode down the long hall. Mary was demure and honorable. When given the letter from her cousin, she anxiously opened it and moved to the window seat at the far end of the room, where she could gain some semblance of privacy. She read the letter and cried. And wished for the days when she was not a queen. She called for McNutt, then taking Tam aside, assured him that she knew nothing of Bothwell's designs to hold the young squirrel against his will. Frankly, added McNutt, with Caroline on his arm, neither did I. Now, I think Lord Bothwell is an honorable wolf, said Queen Mary. He just loves Scotland and loves his queen. She paused and thought for a moment. And are not love of queen and country two of the most motivating forces, even at times to the detriment of those freely giving the love? Tam acknowledged the truth in what Mary had said, and thought it best to leave the Queen speaking the final words on the topic, and with her permission, he and McNutt took their leave. On their way down High Street, Tam stopped at the apothecary and thanked the old porcupine for his help. Then he and McNutt set out for Aberfeldy and the mysterious old badger of Loch Tay. And that's the end of chapter 12 And I will tell you, I think there's not much left. This is a short book. Um, Chapter 13 is The Hole in the Stone. We're going to read that. I'm going to give you guys a choice. Since you're here tonight and everybody else is somewhere else listening to somebody else, um, I'm going to have you place it to a vote. We can do one of two things tomorrow. We can take Friday night's show and complete Tam O'Hare till it's done. We could also, there was another thing I thought of doing before we finish this book, and that would be I thought of doing tarot readings on air, and I can't really take calls. I'm not set to do that, but we can do them through the chat room. If you're here in the chat room and you would like me to do a mini reading for you, which would consist of a card to 3 cards, maybe throw an extra one down. I don't know. We'll have to see how it all goes. But if you'd like to do that, we can do that tomorrow night. So tell me what you would like to see. If you'd like to do the tarot readings tomorrow night, let's do that, and we'll save the end of the book for Monday. If you'd like to hear the end of the book, we can do that tomorrow as well. So I leave it in your hands. So you guys let me know what you'd like to do. And if you want to take a vote of those of you here in the chat room, let me know what you thought. Becky says, or I'm sorry, it's Sue said, I just bought 2 decks. I love reading, but also love the end of a book. Too many choices. It's nice to have options. I think tarot readings would be fun to see. We could do that, Leslie. Now, just to give you a little background, if you didn't see on Rocky's show, and if you don't know this about me, I have done tarot readings since the mid 1980s. I started in about 1985 or 6, and that's when I got my first Rider-Waite deck. I cracked it open, had never read tarot before, knew nothing about it. I had a good friend of mine. We were both in our early to mid 20s. Imagine me, I'm back there, I'm 26 years old, and I crack open this deck and I say, let's give this a shot. And I looked at the diagram in the book as to how to lay out a Celtic cross spread, and I had to read all the definitions because I didn't know a damn thing about the cards. And I read him, and the man was in tears by the time we were done because he said it was so bloody accurate. And so there we go. I'm going to take a sip of this and see if it's still good. All the ice melted into it. And so I could also do a lesson. That's Lewis just suggested that. I could do a quick lesson. Let's see. Same Scotty, 81. I could see what the 81 meant. That was from Sue's. Oh, 81, 1981. Gotcha. Let's see. You should give a lesson on how to use them. No way, Susie Q. What'd Susie Q say? I'm busy in and out with babies, and I guess I missed it. So do you see someone's life or their future? Leslie, I can see what I read for is current energies. I don't like to do future reads, although when I do a full spread, there's always a future read. There is past, present, and future in a mini read. I can take a single card and just read the energy for the day, the current of what's going on. If I do 3 cards, it's past, present, and future. And the future, I say, is always mutable. It's always changeable because we step into our future and we start changing it right away. Usually the future reading card is a card that is, if you do nothing to heed the advice in the reading and make changes, or if you let things stay as they are, this is the probable future you're going into. Although you can change it by active volition. So there you go. That's my feeling on it, Leslie. I like the Tree of Life spread. I use usually the Celtic cross. That's when I do a full 10 card spread, which takes about an hour to an hour and a half to read. So we wouldn't be doing many of those on air. So let me go back a little bit. Richie, I didn't say hi to you when you came in. Thank you for being here. He says, excellent. Scotty, just excellent. Thank you for that. Um, Jeannie Griffin, thank you. Topper, good to see you. I didn't see you come in. Glad to have you here tonight. Let's see. Anything here? You can tell how happy it is to. I am very happy to have you all here, and I appreciate your time. Means a lot to me that you would come and sit and listen to me read a book I wrote for kids. Let's see. Scott reminds me of his one of his hats on. Thank you, Leslie. I remind you of a swashbuckler. Thank you. You should see me when I was all dressed up in my Renaissance Festival gear and things like that. You know, you can go over to my Facebook and you look through my profile pictures, you'll see that stuff. I'd show you now just to show you fest pictures, but you know, our costumes weren't costumes. Our costumes were, as we referred to them, period clothing. That was what we wore. We made clothes to the era to wear for the day. I had a leather doublet. What I wore was a leather doublet, and I was um, the kind of character I played toward the end of my days there at the festival was a duke, the Duke of Abergavenny, Wales, and I was a cousin to the king, and I wore a leather doublet that was black, black, and black with one red square here, and it had silver, real silver thread embroidery, fleur de lis, 3 lions, fleur de lis all over the back, little ones, and detachable sleeves, and the white shirt, and I had the silver clasps, and I would wear it open with the open white shirt, and of course I was about 50 pounds lighter than I am now, and I wore black velvet tights and big black leather bucket boots that came up over the knee, and of course 2 belts with my swords and my daggers and things like that. And we swaggered. That's what we did. We swaggered. And I wasn't Scottish, so I got the Scottish going because of reading the books. But we spoke this way, Your Majesty, and it was faux English accents. That's what we did. So yes, we felt ourselves to be very swashbuckly and swaggery. And this is the sword I wore out there, as I mentioned last night. That's my old festival sword. That's the one I did stage combat with. So there you go. So, well, let's kind of, it's 10:18. It's kind of funny. Every night of the reading, we've been ending right at 40 minutes before Rocky Stucci and I go live with the Situation Room, which we're doing tonight. And we're going to have Professor Bauer on with us tonight, for those of you who know Professor Bauer and are looking forward to it. Leslie, I'm back. Is it replaying? It shouldn't be No, this is me. I'm still live, Leslie. So it's now 10:19 Central Standard Time, which would be 11:19 Eastern Time, and 9:19 out there on the left coast. Let's see. Leslie says, Scotty, in doing a tarot reading, can you get unanswered questions? You mean you just get nothing? Yeah, it's happened. And I've seen it happen. And you know what? I'll save it for tomorrow night. I was going to show you a little example, but we'll save it for tomorrow night. And sometimes you don't get anything. Let's see. I feel called. I'm just looking some comments here. Period clothing is correct. Nice, Scotty. I feel called to create an event in the future with jousting medieval food. Yeah, there you go. We all were, Scotty, lighter. Lighter back then. Yes, Jeannie, we were. And I'm sad to say, since my heart attack and my open heart surgery and my hip replacement, all in the last two years and a few months, I basically put on about 30 to 40 pounds, sitting on my ass, doing nothing, you're supposed to exercise, you're supposed to do your PT, but the 8 months I had to sit waiting for after my heart surgery for my hip surgery. It was more than months. I'm sorry. It was a year. It was 8 months by the time I found out into the cycle. You had to wait a year to get the major surgery on the hip done after the heart surgery. So I sat and it progressively got worse and worse. They gave me one kind of shot in there. It was cortisone of some kind, I think, that completely blocked the pain in there for about 3 weeks. And I was absolutely in heaven. But then it gradually came back. And so by the time I had surgery, I had put on almost 30 pounds, just sitting on my duff, and 20 pounds maybe. And then I put on probably about another 20 after the surgery. And it was very slow. It still gives me problems now. Heart's perfect, by the way. Graft is perfect. There's other problems in there, but it's fine. Cardiologist said I'm fine. She said your graft is gonna outlive your body. I'm like, oh, that's great. So that's good. My hip is what's giving me problem, and now the other hip is starting to go. So I just there are days I have these miserable visions of no quality of life left, and it gets a little discouraging. But there are some days I do all right. So I've just got to keep at it and try to work it back into shape. I can't do certain things. I don't know if I'll ever be able to ride a horse again, because you can't. I can't bring the hip out that far to swing it up over a saddle. So things like that. And so blah, 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 blah. I'm complaining. I'm just telling you. Yeah, that's why I put on the weight I put on. So anyway, I walk differently now. Yeah, that's true. I walk almost with a cane some days. So, but I don't want that. I want to be virile, intact, energy, which I got none of. I got no energy. If I look tired, it's because I'm tired all the time. I want that energy back. I had it just 2 years ago. And I know I told this when Rocky and I were talking about this once on air. I remember when the hips went a year and a half ago. I told the doc, I said, 2 years ago, I was climbing mountains in the Sinai. And I said, now I can't climb up the stairs to my bedroom. And what's wrong with my hips? And he told me both of them were shot. So this one's been okay. The left one, the right one. So not to complain, I'm just telling you where I'm at. So you have to laugh at it. There's some days it makes you cry, figuratively speaking, you get pissed off. But you know what? It'll come back. It's just getting and doing and making things happen. Sitting here is easy. Getting up from here is tough. So it tends to, I take 2 steps and it's all got to kick in. So, but I'm not an invalid or anything like that. So I have somebody peeking in the door and we're just wrapping it up. So here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow night, we're going to do the tarot readings then. I've seen enough people say, yeah, let's do the tarot readings, and we'll save the end of the book for another day, probably next Monday. So let's see. I appreciate that, Jeannie. So all of you, we'll see you in about a half an hour. Oh, here's my wife. Hey, come in here. There's my Rainy. Oh, what's wrong with your shirt? What'd you get on your shirt?
Chocolate ice cream.
Oh, it's chocolate ice cream. Well,
I had to give the kids ice cream before bed.
That's right. That's right. So that was my wife, Rainy, for those of you who don't know her. So good to have you all here. And I will see you tomorrow night. We'll do the tarot thing. And everybody's saying hi, Rainy, says Jeannie.
Hi, Jeannie.
Jeannie, hey, come on back. Come on back over here and just stand with me for a minute. So I'm going to move my mic up just a little bit, folks, so there's room for my wife. So there's my lovely wife, Rainy.
Move that up so it doesn't look like a weird nipple.
A weird nipple. It's a weird nipple. Don't worry about it. I don't think anybody cares.
Nice.
So she graciously gives me this time. This was her idea that I do the books, by the way. So you can blame her.
Yeah.
And here, if we move that, then here.
I
There,
don't
now
need
your
to talk.
now your weird chocolate nipple doesn't show.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure. And let's see. That's all I got. It's been the long goodbye here tonight. So thanks for being here. You don't know how much it means to me that you would take your time to come and listen to me read and talk and stuff like that. So we'll see you here tomorrow night, same time. Going to do some tarot stuff. And we'll see you now in a half an hour on Rocky's channel for the Situation Room with Dr. Professor Bauer joining us tonight. So it should be a fun time.
Yeah, yay. Rocky's always fun.
Yeah, Rocky's
I haven't listened to Robert yet, so.
Yeah. So we'll see you there. And that's it. What do you think? Should I quit?
Sure, yeah. Good night.
All right. Good night, guys. Love you. Thanks for
Bye.
being here. Bye-bye.